The two officers leaned against their squad car, laughing as they exchanged remarks about the man walking past them. He was black, dressed in a sharp suit, and had the kind of quiet confidence that turned heads. But to them, he was just another guy to size up, another stranger to judge. One officer smirked, tossing out a casual remark, one he assumed would never come back to haunt him. What they didn't know was that this man wasn't just passing through. He was about to walk into the station and take a seat at the head of the department, their new boss, and soon those careless words would carry a weight they never expected. When reality hits, will they own up to their mistake, or will they scramble to cover their tracks? Stay tuned, because this is one moment they'll never forget. Inside the station, the air buzzed with routine chatter, officers filing reports, phones ringing, the hum of another day on the job. No one paid much attention as the man stepped through the doors. He moved with purpose, scanning the room, catching small details, the tired dispatcher rubbing his temples, the rookie nervously adjusting his belt, and in the corner, the two officers from outside, still laughing, still unaware. A lieutenant approached, his expression shifting from curiosity to realization. "Sir, welcome," he said, voice steady but careful. Heads turned. The room quieted, eyes flicking toward the man now standing in their midst. The two officers stiffened, their laughter cut short as recognition set in. The man offered a polite nod, but his gaze lingered on them for just a second longer. He didn't need to say a word. The silence spoke volumes, and for those officers, the weight of that moment had just begun to sink in. The station felt different now. Conversations had slowed, and stolen glances followed the man as he walked toward the chief's office. The officers from outside exchanged nervous looks, their earlier confidence replaced with unease. Did he hear them? Did he recognize their voices? They weren't sure, but the possibility made their stomachs tighten. Behind closed doors, introductions were made. The man, now formally addressed as Deputy Chief Carter, listened as the police chief welcomed him to the department. Carter had seen this before. He knew how some would react. Some would embrace change, others would resist it. And then there were the ones who underestimated him, like those two officers outside. Meanwhile, in the break room, the tension grew. Whispers spread. "That's him," someone muttered. The two officers sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. One of them swallowed hard. "You think he's gonna say something?" Neither had an answer. But they knew one thing: whatever came next, they weren't in control of it anymore. The tension in the station only grew as the day went on. Deputy Chief Carter remained professional, his expression calm, his presence controlled. But beneath it all, he was watching, listening. He had spent years in law enforcement, and he knew how to read a room. The whispered conversations, the stolen glances, the way those two officers stiffened every time he walked by. They knew, and now they were waiting for the fallout. During the afternoon briefing, Carter finally addressed the department. He spoke about leadership, accountability, and the kind of culture he expected. His voice was steady, but his words carried weight. He wasn't here to play politics. He was here to lead. From the back of the room, the two officers sat frozen, their stomachs in knots. Then, just as the meeting ended, Carter's eyes landed on them. He gave a small, knowing nod. "Officers Daniels and Reed," he said evenly. "A moment of your time." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to them. Their worst fear had just come true. The room stayed quiet as Officers Daniels and Reed slowly stood, their faces unreadable, but their nerves were impossible to hide. They followed Deputy Chief Carter down the hall, each step heavier than the last. Every officer they passed knew something was coming, but no one dared to speak. Inside Carter's office, the door clicked shut behind them. The air felt thick. Daniels shifted uncomfortably while Reed cleared his throat, trying to mask his unease. Carter took a moment, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them sweat. Then he leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "Do either of you want to repeat what you said to me this morning?" His tone was calm, but the weight behind it was undeniable. The officers froze. Their worst fear was confirmed. He had heard them. But before they could fumble for an excuse, Carter reached into his desk and pulled out a small recorder. "I'm going to give you a chance," he continued, "because what happens next depends entirely on your honesty." Daniels and Reed exchanged a panicked glance. They had no idea how much he knew or what he planned to do with it. Daniels and Reed sat stiffly, their minds racing. The recorder on Carter's desk felt like a ticking time bomb. Neither dared to speak first. Finally, Daniels swallowed hard and muttered, "Look, sir, we didn't mean anything by it." Carter raised an eyebrow. "Didn't mean anything." His voice was calm, but his eyes stayed locked on them. "That's the problem. You say things without thinking, without realizing the impact." He let the words hang, watching them shift uncomfortably. Reed exhaled sharply. "We messed up," he admitted. "But you're not going to fire us, are you?" Carter studied them for a long moment, then shook his head. "No." Relief flickered across their faces, but it was short-lived. "I don't believe in throwing people away, but I do believe in accountability." He slid a folder across the desk. "Starting Monday, you'll be leading a new community outreach program, directly engaging with the people you're supposed to protect." Daniels blinked. "Wait, you want ******? "Yes," Carter interrupted. "You'll listen, you'll learn, and maybe you'll come out better officers for it." He leaned back. "Or you can turn in your badges. Your choice." Daniels and Reed exchanged glances. They hadn't expected this. But deep down, they knew this was their moment to prove who they really were. Daniels and Reed sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Turning in their badges meant walking away in shame, but staying meant stepping into unfamiliar territory, facing the very people they had once judged too quickly. Finally, Daniels nodded. "We'll do it." Carter studied them for a moment before giving a small nod. "Good. Then prove that you belong in this department." The next week, the officers found themselves in a community center, shaking hands with the same people they had once overlooked. They listened to stories, heard concerns, and for the first time, saw their city from a different perspective. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Back at the station, Carter watched from a distance. Change didn't happen overnight, but it started with moments like this. And as Daniels and Reed stepped into their new roles, one thing was clear: this was just the beginning.